2 Corinthians chapter 12, please. And so we're wrapping up over the next probably 3-4 weeks this study of the Sunday School lesson series and Stewarding Life, and we're starting to get into, I'd say, some of the meatier topics that are not meant to be run through and rushed through, but meant to be chewed on and thought about and meditated on for a while. All of it is, but I'd say some of these are going to hit a little bit closer to home in different ways, and we want to be very open to maybe what the Lord has for us in this, and especially this topic here, when we think about trials, and that's what we're looking at this morning, is stewarding trials, meaning not to waste a trial. There's nothing more discouraging than to have a trial and get nothing from it, not grow in the Lord out of it, not see God in it. I mean, what a waste that would be. What would be the point of it? And you definitely don't want to spend it and just be expended from it and be totally wasted and depleted out of it, but you want to steward it for God's glory. I'm thinking about the summer. I remember as a kid, sometimes I wouldn't be able to see this when I was in school, of course, as a kid, because it was only on daytimes and the weekdays. But during the summer, I remember as a kid, I used to watch The Price is Right. Anybody ever watch that? I used to love that show with Bob Barker. Hey, Miss Felicia, welcome back. All the way from Ghana, got back safely, and so praise the Lord for that. Good to see you, sister. I think the handouts might be in the back there on the back table. Good to see you back. Glad you're able to be back home. And how was your trip?
It was good. The first week we were all sick.
There's still some of that going around, so there's still a lot of people not here who are sick, but we're glad you're here. But The Price is Right. So Bob, I don't know the new one. I haven't watched any of the new stuff with the new guy. But Bob Barker, I mean, that guy was doing it for, 50, 60 years or something like that. And I always wondered, like, where did he ever find that microphone? We got microphones here, but he had that long, skinny microphone. It was like probably about this long, had just a little top on it and super skinny, and held that. And I remember there's tons of games I used to love watching on there. But there's one I always thought was funny is because as a kid, you don't know what things cost. You don't know how much things are. And there would be like a normal everyday item. So let's say it has a bottle of water. And you'd have to, and it'd have like a price there. Let's say $2, whatever. And you have to say higher or lower. Anybody remember that kind of game in that regard? And then you had a certain budget you went over and different things like that. And then if you went too high, you lost the game, or whoever came the closest within, all that kind of stuff. And I always wondered what the price was. And I always thought that was a funny game, and I always try to guess what it is. And I'd be so off because I had no idea as a kid. You're not buying stuff. You don't know what things cost. And I always loved that game, just trying to guess the price of things. Or even when they got to whatever they called the last game, the big game, the grand finale, and they'd have like vacations and cars, and you'd have to try and get it. And I was amazed when sometimes somebody would get it like within $100 of the total value. They'd guess like $30,364, and they were off by like $20 or something like that. And they would end up winning both prizes. They were like, imagine that, winning all the prizes on The Price is Right like that. And I was like, how did they ever know what that guess? And you think they just pulled out of a hat or something and they get it. And but what they're doing is trying to assess a value based on what they think it costs for those things, and to be able to play that game. Even as a kid, maybe you try to peek at Christmas gifts with the wrapping on. You try to pull it back a little bit. It's under the tree when you're little, and try and just peek in. Sometimes you're trying to be real surgical about it and pull back the tape and look at it and then put it back where you couldn't tell that nobody. Some of you are looking at me like you've never done that before. I mastered it. By the time I was like 12, I was a master at it. I spent 12 years learning how to do that. And as a kid, I pull it back and try and look at it and see what it is and put it on, and try and get an idea of what that gift might be inside before you actually had it given to you. Maybe you wondered about how much a gift that you received might have cost the person who gave it to you. And I say all that to say this: have you ever tried to figure out what is the value to something that God has brought your way? Have you ever tried to figure out how valuable something that God allows into your life and what the value of that is? Now, when we think about it like that, we're not talking dollars and cents, but everything that God allows in our lives has value. Right. There's some value that God esteems for us, which is why He gives it to us. You think about some gifts that are really helpful to us in our lives, the gift of time. Who here wishes they could have more time for something? And whatever it may be. I want more time to hit golf balls. That's what I want more time for. I want more time to go out walking every day. I want more time to clean up my backyard. I want time to do all those things. I wish I had more time for relationships. Spend more time with somebody that I love and care about, and just have more time with them. I wish I had more finances. I don't have any money problems because I don't have any money. I wish it worked out like that, right? That's not the case. But a lot of times we eagerly receive and even, I would say, work very diligently to gain the fullest potential of something in our lives. But then there are some other gifts that we don't look the same way as the gifts of time, relationships, the gift of opportunity that God gives. As far as good things that happen, there's other gifts that maybe we don't consider gifts in the same way. How about unemployment? We don't think of that as a gift, do we? What about chronic illness? Just being sick for a long period of time with one thing. I think about, when I say that, I think of Miss Mariana. She had so much problems with her dental work and things like that, and just a chronic illness over time, and just having to deal with that, and just a lot of things. Some of you have had chronic illness we've prayed for about over time. We don't look at that as gifts, do we? The loss of a loved one. How can that be a gift? But I would say when we look in the thought of stewarding trials, God gave those also. God gave those like He would give you opportunity, like He would give you time for something, like He would give you finances for something. He also gave the gift of problems. You say, how can that be a gift? Well, that's what we're going to look at this morning here. You think about, what if the gift inside, the gift that we are given by God, only becomes ours if we unwrap it? I mean, if you knew God said, here's a gift, it's all wrapped up, got a bow on it, packaged, and you know it's a gift of unemployment, chronic loss, or some tragedy, you'd probably not want to open it and receive it, huh? You'd probably try and push it off, avoid it, throw it away, not take it. But we don't get the benefit of knowing what the gift is, but everything that comes from God's hand is a gift to us, good, bad, or otherwise. And I say bad in quotations, because every good thing, every gift is from God that is good. Everything that God gives is good our way. That's a hard thing to say, especially when you've been through some things, and we've all been through something. And I would say this, if you're not in a trial, you're either about to enter into one or you're just coming out of one. That's how it seems in the cycle of life so many times. Have you or do you know someone who has had some things happen to them? Maybe a very frightening doctor's report. Have you ever known, or have you had maybe something that happened to you, like a warning from your boss, and you don't know whether you're going to be at that job much longer? Maybe some kind of rejection from somebody in some way. And when you think about those kind of things, whether they be good gifts or bad gifts, whatever those things that we don't know how they're going to turn out, we have to be willing to make a decision that could radically impact our current trial's benefit. Meaning, we have to decide ahead of time how we're going to handle what God brings our way. If we wait until God brings it our way and we start opening that gift, opening that thing from God, and start realizing what it is, then we're forced to react to whatever's happening. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I don't always react the best way whenever things I don't expect to happen in my life. I wish I reacted the right way every single time, but I don't. And I'd venture to say none of us do on all things. It's hard to sit there and say, praise the Lord, as soon as something bad happens. It's not easy. But I believe if we steward the trials that God gives us, we can get to that place and determine ahead of time, God, we trust you, we love you, we know you love us, and I'm going to praise you for it. And maybe I can't get my head around what's happening to me, but afterwards I want to praise you at the end of it too. Those are good things to decide ahead of time. When we speak of stewarding trials, well, I want to make clear what we're not talking about is trying to control the trials. Some of us don't want to admit that we are dirty little control freaks when it comes to things that happen our way. We want to control everything, right? Because if it's in my hands and I can control it, I can make sure it's safe. That's what we think in our heads. What we don't like is whenever things are outside of our control, decisions are outside of our control, decisions are outside of what we can do, and it's down to somebody else and have it depend on somebody else because we've been down that road before and we've been burnt a time or two depending on somebody else, right? That's tough. But when you think about control, how much are you actually in control of anything? The most I can control is me. Anything outside of me, I really can't control. With my children, I can't control what they do to some extent because they have their own, they're their own person. I can correct them, I can stop them, but that's not control because it doesn't change their heart necessarily. We have to get out of this place where we think that every problem that comes in our life is something that we can control and change to make it fit the way we want it to fit. When in actuality, the only thing we can control is how we handle what comes our way. The only thing you can control is how you respond to those things that are out of your control, essentially. And that's always the challenge. But if we know that God is in control, then we can control how we manage, how we steward those trials. And so here's 3 distinct areas in which we can begin to, in this process of trials, allow God's miraculous growth and blessing in our lives to help us. Number 1 is humility. It's good to have an attitude and a spirit of humility in everything. The day you start believing your own hype about yourself is the day you're going to fall. Well, this won't ever affect me. This will never bother me. I'll never let this. Careful of those words. That's the beginning of the end of that issue and where you're going to start having troubles. And it's no surprise whenever we try to control everything and we think this can't happen to me, and then we get bent out of shape because it doesn't go that way. Well, no wonder it didn't, because we were trying to control all things. We were trying to make everything fall under our plan and our way and under our control. It's not wrong to have a desire for something to turn out a certain way. It's wrong to get mad when it doesn't. It's wrong to get bent out of shape when it doesn't happen that way. So we talk about humility here. Look at 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 1. We'll start there. 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 1. I realize humility is something that you can never understudy because you're always challenged with it. Right. You can never under-meditate on humility and think about yourself and being humble. Right. You know, a lack of humility is the biggest reason why people get in arguments and get mad at each other. Yes, sir. Yeah. It's why a lack of humility a lot of times is why we choose not to be around certain people. And I get avoiding some things because they're not right, but a lot of times if we humble ourselves, we would avoid a lot of the problems that persist and stay within our lives a lot of times. The anger, the bitterness, the heartache, and the hurt. 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 1. It is not expedient for me doubtless to glory. I will come to visions and revelations of the Lord. I knew a man in Christ above 14 years ago, whether in the body I cannot tell, or whether out of the body I cannot tell. God knoweth. I think that's the funniest statement that Paul writes sometimes. I don't know where I was. I don't know what was going on. Sounds like somebody who had a fever of like 102 degrees. I don't know whether I was in the body or out of the body. I don't know. You ever like just so out of it you don't know whether you said something or not? And like that's how I feel like that's how Paul was. And he probably got stoned, and that's not, he got literally stoned. Just thinking about that. Literally hit with rocks. But that's kind of funny in itself, just thinking about that. But Then he goes, such a one caught up up to the third heaven. And I know such a man, whether in the body or out of the body, I cannot tell, God knoweth, how that he was caught up into paradise and heard unspeakable words, which is not lawful for a man to utter. Now, if any Christian in the first century could boast, it was probably Paul. He was allowed to view into this third heaven that he's talking about here. But look at verse 5 now. Of such a one will I glory, yet of myself I will not glory, but in mine infirmities. For though I would desire to glory, I should not be a fool. He's saying, I'm not going to think of myself. I'm not going to allow myself to think of myself in a high way. If I do that, I'll be foolish. Paul knew himself very well, and I think the Lord knew Paul very well for Paul to say, I'm not going to let myself think of myself. Because when I start thinking of myself, I start puffing myself up. Look at verse 6. For though I would desire to glory, I shall not be a fool, for I will say the truth. But now I forbear, lest any man should think of me above that which he seeth me to be, or that he heareth of me. And lest I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of the revelations, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, the messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure. For this thing I besought the Lord thrice, that it might depart from me. When he says a thorn in the flesh, what do you think he, generally speaking, could be talking about? A thorn in the flesh. Michaelia? A trial, okay. How about something go a little bit more specific? So that was good at a general level, maybe a little bit less general, but still general. Bonnie? Yeah, so a lot of times in Scripture, when they're talking about, in this case, in this specific case, they say a thorn in the flesh. He's talking about something that he's battled over a long length of time that he hasn't gotten over or past. What we would say, maybe, I don't know what he had in his day, it doesn't say, but for some people, diabetes. Diabetes could be something that stays with your life. That's a battle. I've known people that battle with that. Some of them born with diabetes as a kid, having to manage that in severe diabetes. I knew a lady that I worked with, she had diabetes so bad, there was a smell emanating from her because of the sugar in her body. It was so strong. She ended up passing away because she had a diabetic attack in her home, and she didn't live with anybody. She was single, and nobody found her for days. But she was battling that problem for years. Some of you have different challenges. It could be from maybe a physical ailment. Maybe you have some kind of pain that no surgery could ever do anything for, or some kind of chronic illness that nothing could ever be changed from. It's something you have to live with. Maybe it's it's a physical or some kind of hurt that you have that's with you all of your days. Paul's saying, I have this thorn in the flesh. I have this problem, and I think it's even a way that hinders me in a lot of ways from doing all that I think I could do or what I think I might be able to do, but I'm not able to do it anymore or ever at all. And he goes in verse 8, I even sought the Lord about it. Have you ever had something that you've had for a while and say, Lord, please just take this away from me? And he says, I sought him 3 times. I went to him 3 times over this. Some of you went to God multiple times over something you've had, but you still have it. So here's the question then, why do you have it? What's God trying to do? The question you don't want to ask is, what's God trying to prove? That's the wrong way to ask it. Saying, what is God doing with this, and what does he want me to do with it? Going back to those gifts you get. Sometimes you get the gift and like, oh, that's nice. What do I do with this thing? Oh, I don't even know what this is. A lot of times that's the gift of trials that God gives us. Like, Lord, I don't even know what this thing is. What am I supposed to do with this thing? I didn't ask for it. I sure wasn't expecting it. But yet here I am and I have it. Humility is a grace developed through the process of seeing how frail we are, our frailty, and trusting in God's strength. To be humble, you have to understand, hey, I'm a fragile person. I'm a broken person that I can't get through these things in my life in and of myself. I can't control any of this, but I know God is in control and he is strong to be able to handle. God's the one that keeps me together, not me. Some people will try and replace God with substances, with different things. They'll try and smoke it. They'll try and drink it. They'll try and whatever, work through it. If I just work more hours, maybe I'll just work through this problem. If I do this or I do that. Humility is us realizing how fragile we are and how strong God is, and allowing God to operate under that understanding in our lives for us. Everything that comes our way, although it may not be sent by God, is filtered through the loving hands of our Father. Everything God gives you, it's come through His hand. Why did I grow up in a broken home? God let that happen. He's allowed that. Why have I had these problems as a child? Why was I abused? Why did I have this? Why did I have that? The dangerous question would be, why doesn't God love me? The right question is, what is God's purpose in this for me? There are things that you are supremely qualified to help other people with that God has given you because He's allowed it in your life, that He wants to use you to help other people. That requires us to one to want to be used of God that way, two, to accept the gift that He gave us that we don't look at as a gift on a regular basis. Because here's the problem. We will look at life so often of things that we didn't have or wasn't able to do or couldn't be able to allow us to have what other people had. And a lot of times the trials that we have, we look through the filter of what everybody else has got going on who don't have that problem. Well, I didn't have a mom growing up. That's all he sees. Everybody with their moms, and everybody's hanging out with their mom, and everybody has a relationship with their mom, but I didn't have one, and that's how I look at my life. That's a dangerous place, because we're only looking at what we don't have and what everybody else does have. And we're not looking at it and saying, God, what would you want me to do with what you've allowed in my life in this way? Number two, the second aspect of this is that we have not only humility, but stability. In trials, to steward trials, we need to have humility, but we also need to have a measure of stability in our lives. Look at 2 Corinthians 12 and verse 9 now. And he said unto me, my grace, God's grace, is sufficient for thee. For my strength is made perfect, complete in weakness. What weakness is that? Ours. He says his strength is perfect. It's complete in your weakness. Meaning God's strength in your weakness actually makes you whole. But if you're living only in your weakness and in your strength, you're incomplete. There's no way you can handle that thing that has come into your life, that thing that has persistently stayed with you, that thing that is here for a season. Your strength and your weakness is not enough. Your weakness and God's strength is all you need. It's complete. And he says, knowing this, that God's grace is sufficient, that my strength is made complete or perfect in weakness, most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Now, I'll be fair here on this verse here. This is like big league Christianity at this point, because now you're saying, I'm going to give God glory in my problems. And that's not saying you shouldn't ask for prayer requests about something. That doesn't mean you shouldn't ask for somebody to pray for you about it. It doesn't mean you shouldn't fast and pray yourself about it and seek the Lord in it. But it's saying you're going to give Him glory because He allowed it. This verse here and how you handle trials will make or break how you go forward in many things. Here's how you know. Are there things you're broken about still to this day that you can't seem to get past? How does it feel when Father's Day comes around, Mother's Day comes around, birthdays come around of somebody that you lost or something that you know you're missing in your life, or something that you have happened that limits you because of your health? If you're still broken over that and you haven't given God glory in it, you're still dealing with it. And you haven't gotten past that. And it's not necessary for you to get past it. It's allow God to help strengthen you through these things. But all we're focused on is, how do I get over that? How do I get past that? And you're trying to do it in your strength and but you realize you're weak also, whether you admit it or not, and you're stuck here and God hasn't had his strength come into your weakness and made things complete. But when that happens, now you're able to give God glory no matter how it turns out, because all things come from God's hands. Now, look at verse 10. Therefore, I take pleasure. It's one thing to give God glory. It's another thing to take pleasure in infirmities. Again, hard, big boy, big girl Christianity. He says, therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities. That thorn in my flesh, I'm going to glorify God in it, and I'm going to take pleasure in it. Also in reproaches, in necessities, meaning the things I need to have happen or to do because of the trial that I have, in persecutions, in distresses, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then am I strong. You ever notice how the Christian life is just full of paradoxes? You want to be strong in some things, you want to be strong in an area, you have to get weak first. It goes totally against everything in our flesh, doesn't it? We try to harden ourselves, protect ourselves, strengthen ourselves, keep people out so that we're not hurt or other things. And God says, hey, you need to allow yourself to be weak so that he can be strong. I have to be simple so that I can have the wisdom of God come into my life. Because if I try and be wise on my own flesh, on my own conceit, then guess what? I become a fool. There's such a paradox in how God looks at our lives and versus how we see it. But I know this, God always provides the opportunity for us to regain balance when things in our lives are unstable. He always gives the opportunity for us to get that stability. And that stability so often is beyond our comprehension. How do you get peace about a certain thing? Have you ever sat back when God finally gives you peace about something that you've had come your way and say, I don't even know how I feel okay about this, how I'm good with what God's doing. That's God's work in our lives. And so what we're going to do, we're going to stop here. We'll pick this up. This is going to be a couple weeks in this, but I want you to just pray and think about whatever you have going on in your life and really chew on this week. Am I entering into this? Am I looking at this with a humble spirit toward God? Am I acknowledging my weakness in this area for the purpose not to give blame to others or to use that as an excuse why I can't do this or can't do that, but am I being honest about my humility in this so that his strength can come into my life? Meaning, am I so truly humble and honest about how frail I am on this thing that God has given me, this trial that I have, that God says, okay, I can bring my strength to this. I can enter into this. I'd ask you to think about that and work on that this week and think towards these things. And then we'll start getting into stability. We're just introducing that, and then we'll start talking about the ability in all things and how God works.